Today's episode is going to be a great one. I have someone for you to meet, Ken Martin. He's a colleague of mine right here at IPS Packaging Automation. He sits right across from me. I see the back of his head every day. This guy has so many stories to share. In fact, we might have to have like volume 1 through 20, because there are just so many things that Ken Martin has seen over the years, from starting a lawn mowing business at the age of 6, through Viet Nam, through going up and down the Empire State Building, to this very day sitting down with us. There are stories to share, and you're going to hear them all right here on Beyond the Box. Well, Ken Martin, you made it to the set.
It is me.
It is you.
Forever.
I know, and
I
has
hope
been.
forever. For a long more time.
For a long more time. And now, Ken, obviously you were born in the 1980s, maybe the early 1990s.
Yeah, right. Right. That was close. 50 years off, right around there.
Okay, so we're just jumping right in. First, Ken, tell us who you are. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? Let's start right in there.
All right. Well, Greensboro, North Carolina, everybody should know where it is, in the middle part of the state of North Carolina. And we lived out in the east side of Greensboro in the Bessemer section. We were a textile town, really, in that period of time.
Right.
It's like everybody was. Mm-hmm. So everybody was basically in textiles, and a couple of people in life insurance and other things.
Mm-hmm.
But
and that kind of created communities, like around the textile mill there?
Yeah, sure. With all the textile mills, we had probably 12 to 13 in town.
Yeah, and I'm sure like those communities, like those textile communities, because they did just kind of grow up around the place of work. Sure. Probably a lot of neighborhood kids you grew up with.
Well, I grew up with all our neighborhood kids.
Right.
They never moved. Nobody moved in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody stayed together until high school. And about that time in life, in 1960, say 65, 64, I graduated in 1962 from Bessemer High School. So, which Ricky is my wife, and she's originally from High Point, North Carolina, but not far away.
Right.
And we both went to East Carolina, so she didn't graduate, but I did. Got out of there, and then a little bit of graduate school in UNC. And guess what happened when I got into graduate school? Here comes the Army calling.
I was going to say, yeah, somebody tapped you on the shoulder.
No, he just calling and said, you were about to be drafted, and you have to report by February.
So Ken, what was that like? Take me back there, because you probably had a plan. You know, if you went through school, you were going to college and continuing your education. Was the military in your plan, or was...
No, I was going to graduate school. I was trying to get a doctor's degree, or going to be sooner or later, in psychology. So I was there, and then next
you got
thing
the call.
I got the call. I went there in fall of 64, and then wound up, after getting the call, wound up not staying much longer. Mm-hmm. So instead of getting drafted, I decided to join. But this was height of the Vietnam War coming up, so you knew where you're basically going to go.
Yeah,
so
all the world was looking there.
Like a fool, I thought the best thing to do was, let me get in armor and get in, or at least I can get inside, and when I'm being shot at, we're inside the tank.
Just duck your head.
Back.
Sure,
yeah.
right.
So I thought I'd stay alive a lot easier that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I graduated. Guess what happened when I got out? Did I go to an armor unit?
Probably
no,
not.
I went to...
What's the opposite of armor unit?
Armor, cavalry.
Okay, that sounds about right.
I wound up in armored cavalry, which I said, maybe that's not too bad either. At least I'll be in a vehicle again that's got armor around it or whatever. So then I found out we really didn't have any. We were in Jeeps, if you're lucky. Mm-hmm. And we went into Cambodia, went into Vietnam, North Vietnam, went into Laos, and all these different areas surrounding South Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And we were trying to track down the enemy before they got into, attacked us in Vietnam. But anyway, got through that, and lucky enough to be alive.
Right.
And
You're here.
This day.
Right.
Here to this day. So it was,
so obviously, Ken Martin got out, because you're sitting here with me today, which I'm very thankful for. So when you served your time, you made it through, you get back to the States, what's waiting for Ken Martin?
Well, that's a good story, because in the Vietnam War, how many people didn't want to go and how many people revolted about going. Mm-hmm. The whole situation the United States was in goes from World War II, where everybody went because they felt it was their duty and they wanted to go get those SOBs that were out there attacking the United States, or afraid they were going to attack the United States. You got to the point of the Vietnam War, nobody wanted war with anybody. So you all of a sudden you start drafting. Well, guess what happens? You got revolts going on from kids going to Canada. They're not going to serve. Then that goes all the way to down through not only that to parents, to everybody in the States did not like going to war and didn't like going, and they criticized all of us that went.
Sure, it was a different nation you came back to.
And it was completely different. We got back in, to have you a good example, we landed in Newark, New Jersey airport, landed there. And we landed, and we didn't land in the terminal or the gateways. We landed about maybe a quarter of a mile from the where you go in the doorways. So we were walking along, and they sent us through this little ramp. It was barbed wire on one side. It had a covering on the top, and it had an open area on the back where we were walking through. Well, the first thing we come around the corner, there's people out there yelling, "Baby killer, you awful people, you're coming back." And they were throwing eggs and tomatoes and everything else at us when we got back after we served in Vietnam.
Wow.
So that was the situation we came back to.
A very different homecoming than like you see at the end of World War II, the ticker tape parade and
nothing.
Kissing in the streets.
They just wanted to get you out of there and home.
Right.
But it got to be a point where that extended in the business world as well. So the first thing I go in and for interviews, and I'd interviewed in banking, I'd interviewed in business for a couple of opportunities, and then finally got in. I was trying to get into a plant to work in that plant, just to work in
just
the
get
plant,
a job.
just to get a job
Right.
at the time, because I had to feed my family.
Right.
We had 2 girls at the time, and my wife and us, and coming home with no stipend.
Right.
There was no stipend when you got out of the Army.
Right.
That was 0. You got 1 month severance, and that was it. You were on your own.
Wow.
So anyway, I was trying to find this, and nobody was receptive. First thing they asked out of your mouth. Went through my whole life description of what it was, where I went to school, where I graduated, and the whole thing. And then the last thing they would ask you, what are you doing now? And you said, I just came back from Vietnam. Well, once you mentioned Vietnam, the whole conversation turned cold.
Really? So you're almost untouchable.
Turned cold, and nobody wanted to talk to you. They said, well, I think we've heard enough. Thanks for coming.
Wow.
That's all you get.
I'm sure, obviously, you were going to feed your family, and you kept knocking on doors, and you were just looking for work. So what happened? Like, where did you go? Who was that person where you were like,
well,
all right, here's another door?
J.P. Stevens. So I walked into J.P. Stevens. They had 3 plants in town. I walked in. The first one was on south, maybe 4 miles from where we had moved in an apartment, and I was getting down to my last pennies. So we walked in this plant, and J.P. Stevens talked to the personnel guy. And he said, and I gave him my rundown. He said, where were you in Vietnam? And I told him on what I was doing there, and he said, I'm going to send you there to this 3rd shift supervisor. So he comes in, he says, you got a job.
Wow.
And I said, what is it? And he says, 3rd shift supervisor for 32 women. And I went, women? He said, 32 women. And I just came back from a war, and they want me to supervise 32 women who are menders.
So how did that lead it? Because that's not what you're doing today. You're doing something very different. So what began the path down? Because it was sales, right? You ended up in sales?
I wound up in sales, but I wound up on this first sales job. I wound up in New York City. Of all
just a
places
little town, little burb up there in the north somewhere.
Yeah, of all places to be, but it was the best thing I ever did in my life. Because you wind up meeting anybody and everybody in the world. And I decided one day I'm going to go into the Empire State Building, which had over 1,000 companies in there with textiles.
Wow.
That were not their major headquarters, but they had sales offices. So I started on the top floor and went all the way to the bottom floor and made a regimen of going back and seeing the same people over and over and over again. Well, it took me 6 months to get my first this is 6 months of work.
Right.
And you're talking about getting defeated.
6 months of nothing.
Defeated.
Just
once you get in there, whether it's the 10th time or the first time or the fourth time, you've got to be able to get him the products that he needs and save him money at the same time and better his process. If you do that, you will get business.
Right.
But if you don't do that, you're just spinning your wheels. So I wound up and saw this one company, the guy's name was, that's why I had to put him down, was Ben Steinberg was his name. I'd gone in this company for those, and the 10th time I walked in, never saw him, kept saying, Ken Martin, here to see Mr. Steinberg. So Mr. Steinberg never answered, and she said, well, I'm sorry, he's busy. He can't see you right now. Come back and try again later. So I'd come back once a month, every time. 10 months later was the 10th time I walked in, could I see Mr. Steinberg? And that's all of a sudden this gruff voice from, hey, get in here, boy. I've been waiting to see you. I said, waiting to see me? I said, I've been here 10 times. He said, I want to tell you something. The reason you're in here right now is because I wait until somebody's come and tried to get my business 10 times before I even talk to them.
Wow.
So I sat there and said, show me what you got. And I walked out of there with $1 million contract. So I started going in, after I got his thing, I started going into a couple of other ones, got some other business, not another $1 million contract, but I started picking up business. And sooner or later, this guy starts telling everybody, he says, hey, you know, and what happened, he used to call me Kenny, and all of a sudden he says, we got to give you a nickname. He says, so when I go into place, I tell you what, we got a great name we're going to name you so people knows who you are. We're going to call you Hilly Billy. And so that was my nickname on the street, Hilly Billy. And if somebody go out and call Hilly Billy and give them my telephone number.
Like, all right, Hilly Billy it is.
So that's good.
And I mean, Ken has you've been a light here. I've just considered it an honor to get to know you and thank you for the stories that you are sharing. Thank you for sharing some of those here on this show. And I actually got a little present for you, Ken. And I was feeling Ken out because I wanted to make sure he was okay with it. But I got a mug for you. It's a little enamel mug. It says
Hilly Billy.
Yep.
Ta-da!
And, I got a shot of that.
That's neat.
And,
I gotta do that and keep that. That will be. It may not be on my desk here all the time, but if it's not, it's going to be in my keepsakes at home. That's for sure.
Well, Ken, thank you for coming on today, and thank you for the gift of stories. And I know that there are a lot more stories ahead of Ken Martin because the things have been instilled in you, the things that you've seen. I know that's a guiding force for you and where you're going. And I'm excited that Ken's here to my left and he's across the aisle from me in our marketing department. Thank all of you for watching this episode of Beyond the Box. We've got more coming your way, but maybe another one of Ken coming down the road because there are going to be more stories.
Well, I do want to say one thing. Just remember, you persevere and you keep getting better in life. And the next thing that I never did say, but one thing about it, it's not about the money. It's about the money you have to feed your family and get along. It's not making $8 million. It's being faithful to what you're doing on your job and always having that perseverance to be better than anybody else. And that's what you want to do in anybody in this company.
Nothing else to say. We'll see you next time.